My name is Jacques Cheminade. I am speaking to all of you from Paris, in France. I was a friend of Lyndon LaRouche and a close collaborator, and I ran 3 times for president in my country. I'm the head of a political party called Solidarity and Progress, which is the representative of LaRouche's ideas in France. Now we're going to hear from Lyndon LaRouche speaking in 1995, after he came out from jail, from 5 years spent in jail, stronger than ever, with a fighting spirit, shaking the United States and shaking the world. The question it raises is why the FBI always came after our organization and personally after its members. You are going to understand why when you're going to hear what Lynn was saying then, and you have a sense why he was a threat for the whole international oligarchy. I'm very honored to give you a short introduction on how I met both Lyndon LaRouche and the FBI at the same time. As soon as I arrived in the United States in 1972, as a French diplomat, I was checked by the FBI. They do that. They do stagger things without even telling me. And even before I met LaRouche's organization, I was gone after because I was considered as a threat, being a thinker, being somebody thinking, trying to think. So the FBI does these things, always. Then, when in 1974, I first attended a meeting organized by Lynn, it got much, much worse. They decided to keep following me, but without ever telling me. And they never tried to contact me because, as they say, and it's the way that they proceed, because I gave no signs of being a potential contributor. So they keep following me without advising me or telling me anything. So I was followed, period, and I only got news of it thanks to something which is still good in the United States, the Freedom of Information Act. But it was much, much later. Then, when I joined LaRouche's political organization and met personally Lynn for a few days in Leesburg, it got even worse. I was gone after practically all the time. In particular, after the Leesburg raid of October 6, 1986. Some of you know about it, and it's part of American history at this point. The FBI sent messages to all the American embassies, or to 3 American embassies in Europe, Bonn, Germany, Rome, and Paris, France, that they would do their best to prevent me to spread our ideas in Europe. So then, almost immediately, in 1986, I was accused to have financially asked money from an old lady contributor, putting undue pressure on her. She was described as an old lady, well, she was 66, and it was told to the police that she had Alzheimer's disease. She was playing tennis, she was driving her car, but apparently she had Alzheimer's disease. This was picked up, and there was a long, long trial. It lasted 10 years. It went for on for 10 years. They always organize these long trials to proceed to your character assassination. This is what they did with Lynn, and then when it was not enough, they sent it to jail. So I was not sent to jail in France, but they ruined my presidential campaign of 1985. I was one of the 9 candidates in that presidential election, supported by 600 mayors. So this was not for them something that could go on. It had to be stopped. They described me as an abuser of old ladies, an old ladies thief, and a friend of the ugly man in the United States, Lyndon LaRouche, who was described variously as crazy, dangerous extremist. And I was described then as a friend of Saddam Hussein, CIA agent, KGB. They said KGB for the right-wingers, CIA for the left-wingers. The question was to slander me as much as they were able to do. Then they organized the rejection of my presidential campaign account, financial account, under a pretext, and they asked the money back. They were like Margaret Thatcher, I want my money back. So they asked money back, and they also asked us to reimburse the money that this person, this old lady, had given them. So 2 things they asked: contribution of the state for a presidential election, and the money this woman had given us. And this was about $400,000 that we had to pay. So this, for our organization, was a shock, and they managed to discourage a lot of contributors. So they tried not only to proceed to a character assassination, but to cut our financial resources exactly like they did in the United States. And it was so clear that a French policeman who was in charge of the first inquiry, he said that they are doing in France the same thing that the people from the Lyndon LaRouche organization are doing in the United States. So these people, when they go after somebody, they have not much imagination. They always use the same old slanders and the same old way to try to create doubts and to prevent the population to know what people are doing to organize them to defend themselves. I tell you that to show the massive attacks against us, and to show you that it didn't happen only in the United States. It happened in the whole world, and in particular in Europe, where they did not want our organization to develop. They did that against Lyndon LaRouche's wife, Helga LaRouche, and at the same time against me. So let's go back to the day, which is something more interesting, of 1974, when I first listened to Lyndon LaRouche. You have to think, I was a French diplomat, I was in New York, and I was looking for something that could be good in the history of the West. So I was shocked by what Lynn said when I first listened to him. First, at the same time, 4 things hit me. First, that this man was a courageous person. He was not as much as most of Frenchmen or Americans. He was not a coward. He was standing up. Second, that even if I disagreed with him in 2 or 3 points, after all human beings are not the same, much more important appeared to me immediately that LaRouche was not peddling something, not repeating a speech, but that he was thinking in front of us, and that he was challenging my way of thinking by his courage to think in front of us. It was like a dynamic of humanity that for the first time from a political person was challenge me at the time. Third, he addressed at the time an attack against the British Empire and its Anglo-American mutation. And it was, this I was delighted, with a devastating humor. And you are going to see now from his intervention in 1995 how it goes. Fourth, what provoked me is that he was saying that there was in the world a financial crisis. This I knew. And I knew that this crisis was organized by a mafia of looters that were going to become criminals. What you have heard from him as in his description of the Shashtian economy to become an economy of killers, of financial and then physical killers, hitmen. So he was saying that. But he was saying at the same time that there was a counterculture, sex, rock, drug, as he put it at the time, who was part also of the world who was coming and who was to be stopped. So at the time, if you were attacking the financial system, you were a left-winger or extreme left-winger. But if we are attacking the sex, rock, drug counterculture, you were an extreme right-winger. So LaRouche was saying, and he was the only person that I ever heard saying that he, at the time, that the two things were one. And this one was a destruction of the human mind and was playing on the greed of people and their desire to possess. And this, at the time, for me, it created, in my mind, and I said, an opening towards, I was 33, towards the idea that much, much more could be learned and thought for, not for me, but for the advantage of the other, to intervene politically to stop this world that was coming and which was a world where I did not want to live or to have children. So I intervened and I decided to intervene at that moment. Lynn was somebody that was acting never for his personal sake, but to organize the others so that they would become more human. And at the time, we have all these interventions of Lynn. He was answering to questions. He was all the time in a motion, in a dynamic, so that we become all creative, more and more creative. And this was, and it still is today, an experience that makes you feel like a human being. Not only makes you feel good, but feel you as a true human being. So what I would ask you now, when you look at what Lynn is saying in 1995, is first to make your life meaningful by fitting into humanity, into your humanity. Humanity, we have all of us potentially inside us, imparting the best ideas that you are going to discover, the best ideas from the treasures of the past. And Lynn is like what they call in Japan, a living treasure. He was alive as a treasure for humanity. And at the same time, these treasures from the past leading to the hopes in the future. Today, we have less excuses than in 1995 because the world situation is much worse, and we are in front of something which is a social rampage coming, and at the same time the threat of a war of all against all, including a nuclear war, mainly describing China and Russia as enemies. And if you start to do that, you create the conditions for a war. And this is where we are. So we have no excuse. This is what I want first to say. Second, we have to understand in that context, in what we are now, the power of Lynn ideas. And we had to fight for his exoneration. This exoneration, and to read what he wrote and to think about it is key, and his exoneration is really something that would create a situation where all people could have access to these treasures that are what he did and what he worked and what he said and what we are going to hear now. Lynn commented many times about him that stupid people would say he's a bad guy, but we don't know why. What I can tell you is not only that he is, because he is still with us, that he is not only a good guy, but he is the most creative individual that I ever met, and he made an immortal contribution to our future, to our common good, and to the future generations in the world to come, if we can keep it. If we can keep it for the common good and the future generations. So, let's make the cause of humanity our cause. Let's think to what Lynn says and move. And also, what I always feel when I think about Lynn, a thing of beauty is a joy forever. So, let's enjoy it.
Now, I know you're doing a lot in this field, you know. I mean, you're reaching a lot of people, but are you reaching those actual laymen that do a lot of the voting, you know, on a wide scan? You know, if that would work out, you know, if you get a good response from that, then the following month, you know, you hit the construction union people, same way, you know. And basically, that's my point. Well,
there is a problem and there is no problem in that question. I understand this keeps coming up all the time, all on chapter meetings all over the country. People ask that question quite naturally. But it's really not a problem. First of all, you have to remember a couple of things, which are not so obvious, but they're obvious. First of all, let's take the operations. I realize it's getting late, but let's go through this because the question comes up that he's asked so often around the country that I think Roger's question should be answered here in a more fulsome way, because others of you might ask the same question and know somebody who does. And it's probably good that I answer it. All right, now, let's go at the legal history of the operations against us. The first open target of operations against us was this gentleman, Tony Pappan, in which a 1969 leaflet issued by the FBI in the name of an organization which became the Weatherman Terrorists, produced by the FBI. Then in 1973, there's a document from the FBI, a document which is primarily produced by the New York office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a document which shows that it was written and shared constantly with the Washington headquarters of the FBI. The document pertains to the FBI using its control over the Communist Party USA leadership to persuade the Communist Party USA that my personal elimination would solve its problems. And during the month of December and into January of 1973-74, an abortive such operation was run with the coordination of communist and other agencies and MI5 in Britain. So in 1973, considering the limited influence we had then, but it was significant, the government of the United States decided that I should be physically eliminated. Hoover was dead. But from FBI hindquarters in Washington, D.C., the order to kill me was out. And they tried and failed. From 1974, from that point on, through 1976-77, The FBI continued to run the largest scale operation against us, against any political organization in the United States. In 1982, I'll give you the picture. Or start with 1981. In December of 1981, I was approached by representatives of the U.S. government and asked to set up an exploratory back-channel discussion with the Soviet government. And I proposed to those who made the recommendation, it came from a gentleman known to me in a certain institution in the U.S. government, that I would be willing to do so on general interest, provided that nobody disagreed with my proposing what I had presented as part of my election campaign as a discussion point for the exploratory talks. It was agreed that I should do so. From February of 1982 through February of 1983, when the final meeting that I had actually with the Soviet gentleman occurred in Washington, I was engaged constantly in continuing back-channel discussion with the Soviet government at the highest level. The subject of that discussion was chiefly my proposal for what became known as the SDI. The SDI came from me and from no one else. I was the sole originator of what became known as the SDI. After it was announced, there were changes made in the policy over the course of the summer of 1983. But what President Reagan announced on March 23rd, 1983 was directly my policy and nothing else. There was no other author in the process. And this came as the president telling the Soviet government, among others, officially repeating exactly what I had outlined to them, and thus confirming that my back-channel discussion with them was something to which he was referring in making his proposal. Now, in the meantime, two things had happened of great significance. Number one, at the beginning of 1982, I had indicated that certain changes in policy which were made on the debt question by the U.S. government and others was going to create a debt crisis in the Western Hemisphere. And then, of course, in the middle of this, we had the outbreak by arrangement of Henry Kissinger and Lord Peter Carrington and so forth of the Argentina-Malvinas War, in which we took a very active role. Now, our active role in the Malvinas War had an effect upon the politics of all of South and Central America, such that when I went down in May of 1976 into Mexico to discuss at that point the Malvinas War, I had an invitation to meet with the president of Mexico, who I knew very well, though we'd never met. We had our own back-channel discussions with President Jose Lopez Portillo of Mexico, which had been ongoing for some time. But at that point, the president decided it was time to meet with me directly. So Fernando Quijano and I had a meeting with the president, and he arranged that I would have at the Presidential Palace at Los Pinos a special press conference, and it was a mammoth one, I must say, by all standards, arranged as a courtesy. At that meeting, the president asked me, it's no secret now, what is going to happen? I said, the intent of the people in the United States and elsewhere is to take your country apart piece by piece. That we must expect that the crisis will hit you by no later than September of this year, at which point they will proceed to take Mexico apart piece by piece. So that was about an hour presentation, and later, some mutual associates who were tied into the establishment of Mexico and other countries suggested that what I'd written on this subject in many papers previously be consolidated in a single report which would be useful to all of the countries on the question of how to deal with the debt crisis. So I devoted a good deal of time to that in the ensuing weeks, and at the beginning of August, I presented a paper known as Operation Juarez, of which copies naturally went to all the relevant people in Ibero-America, and also to the National Security Council, to the relevant people in the United States government. And as you know, shortly after that, in August, the Mexican debt crisis exploded. And you may not know that during the hours of the explosion of that debt crisis, the entire world financial system almost went into a chain reaction collapse. Now, in the meantime, in June and July of 1982, there was a big powwow in Washington. And all of the agents of the Soviet government had to go back to Moscow like the ravens gathering at the roost. And at this meeting, they all had, in this context, they all had to write their Venetian ambassador-type essays. The type you will find of the Venetian ambassadors on leaving their post would write a message to the Doge at call about the country which they've been spying in. And these letters, many of them still exist. Well, the Soviet government had some Venetian practices. And a KG man was stuck in a room, or presumably have to write out his full report, a written report, and take, I guess, an oral examination, or even an anal one on the question thereafter. So the purpose of this was the opinion that Brezhnev was, yes, indeed, about to die. And the selection of the next successor was a formality at that point, and Yuri Andropov was selected. In this context, somehow, the nature of my back-channel discussion with the Soviet government on behalf of the Reagan government became known. The reaction to that was that in the meeting which occurred at the Bohemian Grove in California, this was the one after which Helmut Schmidt bragged that he shared a bathtub with, it was Helmut Schmidt shared a bathtub with Henry Kissinger. But they weren't in the bathtub at the same time. But in any case, they might have contracted a disease or something together. But anyway, there you had Lee Kuan Yew, Henry Kissinger, Helmut Schmidt, all in George Shultz's automobile, traveling from George Shultz's house up to the Bohemian Grove. At the Bohemian Grove, according to correspondence we had a Judge Webster of uncertain gender and parentage, the head of the FBI, was present. And in August of that year, Henry Kissinger wrote a letter to Judge Webster, it's the so-called Dear Bill letter, which you can see, many of you know it, which started an attempt to have a special government operation run to eliminate me. In January of 1983, the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, the rump session of it, endorsed Henry Kissinger's proposal. This resolution which carries the weight of Executive Order 12333, was then transmitted to Judge Webster, who had previously declined to get an operation in place against me, who now started one. Judge Webster assigned the operation to Oliver Buck Revelle, the same guy who set up the drug trafficking out of Mena and later passed the job on to Oliver North. And Revelle set up the operation. So an international, special, undercover foreign intelligence operation was set up against me and my associates. The operation began to operate fully by April of 1983, less than a month after the announcement of the SDI. At that point, in New York City, under a member of the intelligence community, that is John Train, a New York banker of Smith & Train, at that time an employee of the international Rothschild banking interests. The man who had been together with the Goldschmidts and Stephen Spender in running the CIA British intelligence encounter operation in Paris during the 1950s. Right? So John Train set up a salon. He's also a crony of McGeorge Bundy. Set up a salon in New York City through the auspices of his private bank. This salon was represented by members of the national intelligence community, also the ADL, NBC TV, the Wall Street Journal, the Reader's Digest, and other scumbags. These people met under the direction of Train, who provided a chart. This chart made a structure of the types of libels which the U.S. news media was supposed to publish against me and my associates, but me essentially. As a result of these meetings and agreements reached, as of January 1984, continuing through 1988, the most massive libel ever presented against any American, any individual American in the post-war period was directed against me through all of the major and many other U.S. news media. This extended into Western Europe. It started in the Soviet Union in 1984, which was integrated with the operation against me by the FBI et al. In the United States. From the accession of Gorbachev to the position of General Secretary in Moscow through 1988, especially in 1986, the most massive Soviet featured attack by all leading Soviet press against any foreigner, individual, was targeted against me, especially during the months from July into October of 1986. So anyone who tells you that they don't know who I am in the United States is either one of the most stupid people in the country, most ignorant, was born the day before yesterday, or is lying. We don't have a recognition problem. It doesn't exist. What we have is a fear problem. I know Americans. Americans were great cowards. I served overseas with them in World War II. And I saw how they reacted in the 1940s when we came back. I watched them cringe before McCarthyism. I watched them so afraid of losing their jobs and their privileges that they became zeros, moral and intellectual zeros. I'll tell you what the problem is of the people who were the 68 generation, the people who were the children of my generation, of the returning war cowards. Not that they were cowards in World War II, but they became cowards when they came home. They were so afraid of the Depression they would do anything for everybody, a bend in any direction, to avoid losing job security. They formed a cult of personal and family security in a small niche at all costs. They degenerated morally naturally. They began jumping in the neighbors' beds. In order to deal with their children, they stuffed them with toys on the new boob tube, the new Satan's one-eyed babysitter, the television tube. And what do we call it? Looney something or other they used to have there on for the kids on the Looney Tunes, huh? We had a great number of people called the 1968 generation who were suckled on Looney Tunes. Their babysitter. The famous electronic wet nurse of 1950s America. Now, I met these kids on the campus. I happen to know their parents, not individually, but as types. And I saw the faults, the immoral shallowness of these people who had been privileged, who had been pampered with too many toys, given on too many impulses, by parents who were jumping in their neighbors' beds, who were cowards, who were obsessed with personal and family security above all other things, who were totally immoral about things going on around them because they didn't wish to become involved unless you found a consensus of people, a protective consensus of majority, which is committed to a policy, they wouldn't move. And that's the problem of Americans. We are dealing with a people today, look at them. How did Americans degenerate? Americans degenerated by a retreat into personal and family values, into niche morality, into feel-good morality. I am a self-righteous moral person. Therefore, I feel good about me. The great crimes of omissions do not occur to them. They go around with a Tavistockian half smile, a grin on their face. I feel good about me. The most immoral, pharisaical, hypocritical swine imaginable. Now you go up and tell them that if you seem to talk favorably about a guy called LaRouche, you could get in a lot of trouble with the FBI and other people. Who's LaRouche? You know it. Most you know this thing. You've seen it. You've had contact with it. Now, the only way you can deal with people is don't play the game. Play the game of truth. You mean you haven't got the guts to admit you know who he is? You're afraid somebody will come up and bite you in the rear end or ankles? You say you know who he is? Now, most people don't know who I am. They know that there's someone that the enemy hates. Every American, if you say, do you think the Queen of England pushes drugs? You want to... Right? Who doesn't know the Queen of England pushes drugs? I never said it, but I wish I had. I mean, let us be realistic. So the problem is not effective propaganda. How are we building? What did I insist upon when I got out of the jug? You know, you got some members around here wish I hadn't been let out. I destroyed their peaceful cottages and things like that. But in any case, what did I insist upon? I said, cut out amateur night. Cut out the cottage industry ways of doing business. Stop commenting upon somebody else's news day book. There is no news in the New York Times. The only news in the New York Times is the editor came out of the closet. Otherwise, there's no news. The Washington Post? You're kidding me? The Washington Times? Associated Press? Ted Stomach Turner? I mean, there are three things that we now know should never be broadcast on television. The sexual act, the manufacturing of frankfurters, and a criminal trial. And I'm convinced, and I've said again and again, the only reason this trial ever occurred is because Ted Turner needed the money. They told him he'd have to marry a lookalike of Jane Turner if he didn't. Jane Fonda if he didn't, whatever. Jane Stomach Turner, whatever it is. All right. So what we are doing is what the point I addressed yesterday morning, or yesterday afternoon. The American people don't know anything. They don't know what's happening to them. They only know whatever it is that's unpleasant. And they'd rather feel good than know what it is. You know that. You're out in the streets. You know the people. And just relieve ourselves. Face the truth about our friends and neighbors. Huh? Right. They don't understand history. In school today, they don't teach history. They teach current events. And you grab a hold of an electric wire. That's called a current event. For all they know. So what's our job? Our job is to say, look, you can lose everything. You can lose your bank account. You can lose your mortgage. You can lose your house. You can lose your food. You can lose everything. Don't tell me what you have that you have to defend. Because everything you have in that nature is about to be taken away from you. It's threatened. Now, you're not going to defend yourself by saying, I'm going to defend these values. I'm going to insist on leading a normal life. I'm going to keep my nose clean and keep my job and keep out of trouble. And I'm going to survive with my bank account and my savings. Crazy. It's not possible. Not when the whole financial system is about to be blown to smithereens, when the industries and the employment are about to be blown away. This is no time to talk about such trivial matters. About I've gone, it's like the guy, look, I've crossed the ocean in this rowboat 5 times. What storm? This kind of thing. So they don't know. They have forgotten these questions. The question of what is life? What is the meaning of mortality? What does life mean? What does my life mean? They haven't faced those questions. What is history? What is humanity? What am I a part of this human race? How am I to understand my existence in the vast expanse of human existence? When everything that I find that I have prized, however foolishly, can be turned to dross, what can I cling to that is real? When I become old and I fear my mortality is overtaking me, what can I cling to that is true and valuable and a just source of pride to me, of my life being meaningful, every instant of my life remaining as to having a meaning? You only find that by understanding mankind and how you as an individual person can fit into humanity. Why you are indispensable to all humanity, or can be. Because you can receive and impart ideas which represent the treasures of the past on which the hope of the future must be premised. So therefore, what's important for us to tell people? It's important for us to teach people universal history, the idea of universal history, the idea of how important it is to be an individual human being, what you can do with the wonderful opportunity which is human life, even a mortal existence, to know what the issues of history are, to know that the European history that we represent is one of the greatest things in all human existence, one of the greatest things that ever happened in this universe. To know that this was a flawed creation because we didn't get rid of evil in the form of the traditional oligarchism. And the time has come when the toleration of evil brings the continued existence of a global civilization into jeopardy. And we are faced with a challenge in the collapse of this system of doing something. Something, even if it takes our life to do it, which means that we will make a transition from a dying past into a living future for our children, for those who come after us. An action in which any of us can take great, profound pride and say, yes, my life is meaningful. It was right that I should have been born and lived because my life has been necessary in this degree. I had to have lived in order to address this problem. Now, we're coming at a time when all of the usual coffee counter values are going down the drain with yesterday's coffee. They don't try to sell it to you today. You got to watch them on that. In that time of crisis, we have to represent the body of ideas which address the heavy questions, the heavy ideas, not the light conversation at the counter, but the heavy ideas. And that's what makes the difference. We are coming into a period whereas probably this fall, the perception of our importance on this planet will be greatly increased. We were never, in the past 25 years, we were never unimportant in the minds of the enemy, and never unimportant in the minds of many people with whom we had dealings. I'm probably today one of the most important Americans in Russia, more than most people could imagine, and in similar parts of the world, similar things in other parts of the world. So we don't have a problem. We have a problem in the fact of the fear within the population. and especially the tendency of the population to be enslaved by the news media. We make that worse when we try to propitiate the population by limiting the topics of our discussion with them to topics which are in the news media. Because then we're commenting upon the lies, which may be truthful, but wouldn't it be better to tell the people the truth, which the news media never mentions? For example, everything said about what's happened in the Balkans, generally in the news media, is a lie. A simple, straightforward lie. Do you want to comment upon the lie, except to say, well, that's a lie? As most things in the news media are lies. But people say, what can I depend upon? You have people tell you, well, I have my opinion. I'm a well-informed person. What do you mean you're a well-informed person? Well, I read the news. I watch television. I read the right magazines. I read the newspapers. I even get the New York Times. I'm well-informed. You know, I say you're very well misinformed. And if your opinions are premised on that, your opinions aren't worth much. You have to tell the people what the news is, that the financial system is collapsing. Look at the ridiculousness of this. The big financiers are taking their private money, they're taking it out of the financial markets as such, and they're going into precious metals, into strategic minerals, into food speculation in anticipation of a world food shortage. They're doing all these things. And you sucker, want to believe the Wall Street Journal that the market is rising and everything is good? Which is what the press is telling you? Now, our job is to get the news across to people. We don't have to worry about people. Don't worry too much about their opinions. They're often wrong. They're usually wrong. They're cowardly. But nonetheless, we love them and we're trying to save them. In the time of crisis, as things crumble, keep a steady hand and a steady voice. They'll respond. They're beginning to respond. Don't worry about it. It's a difficult problem. We'll do the best we can. We're going to do very well. And we don't have to win. All we have to do is have our cause win, however that occurs. Don't worry about it. We're doing the right thing.